The year was 1962, Knoxville, Tennessee. The talented 15-year-old Connie McHugh finishes school early and gets a job as a nurse at the local hospital. One day after work, she meets a charming actor and musician named Tony Tarantino. After a few months, they get married, and a few months after that, they split. As a parting gift, Tony leaves his ex-wife a surprise, a little of his DNA, which 9 months later receives a name.
I found out I was pregnant after we split, but never tried to get in contact with him.
Gunsmoke, starring James Arness.
During her pregnancy, Connie watched the TV show Gunsmoke, where the enchanting Burt Reynolds played the role of Quint Asper. The young girl was enamored with the character and decided to name her future child after him.
But I wanted a more formal name than Quint. And then I was reading a Faulkner book, The Sound and the Fury. The heroine's name was Quentin. So I decided that my child was going to be named Quentin, whether it was male or female. I was also looking for a limited number of nicknames. The shortest would be Quint, which I promptly shortened for Q, the name by which most of his friends refer to him.
Connie married again when Q turned 2. She chose a musician named Kurt Zastapil. Kurt gave Quentin his last name and adopted him. The family moved to Los Angeles, where Quentin's mother began a successful career in pharmacology. Her career began to take off, and they settled in South Bay, one of the nicest neighborhoods of the city. His mother's love for television and the cinema seemed to genetically pass down to Quentin. He began to go to the movies before he could walk. He was barely 5 when his mother would take him to movies like Carnal Knowledge and Deliverance.
You better run, you son!
While his peers were watching things like Dumbo and The Jungle Book, he was enjoying The Wild Bunch and Midnight Cowboy.
I'm walking here! I'm walking here!
The child became consumed with films. He rehearsed scenes from them with his toys and often pretended to be the hero from various movies. This obsession was of no help at school, and though his IQ was a school record-breaking $160, it didn't seem to reflect in his grades. Teachers recognized his talent, but he was terrible at writing and math. In addition, he was so restless and disobedient that the school psychologist tried to convince Connie to start giving him sedatives, but she refused to do that. The boy couldn't tell the time, ride a bike, or swim, but he could describe every film that he had ever seen, say which actors were in them, who directed it, and dreamed only of becoming an actor. As the years passed, nothing changed, and at 16, he dropped out of school with his mother's blessing.
I could send him off every day and have him hanging out on street corners, or I could let him quit, and I thought I'd actually have more control over him if I let him stay at home. I wanted him to see that life without an education would not be a picnic.
But a picnic it was. Having reverted to his birth father's last name, which was more compatible with a Hollywood career, he easily found work in the film industry. At first, he became a cashier in an adult movie theater. However, the dream of many teens in the 70s didn't resonate with him. He loved real films and considered to be cheap, disgusting, and boring.
Who are you? What are you doing here?
He spent his salary on acting classes. Q attended James Best Group, an actor who rose to fame thanks to the movies Shock Corridor and Verboten. Best method was simple. He wasn't producing the next Sophia Loren or Marlon Brando. He was getting his students ready for regular roles on TV. So the most important thing he taught was how to behave naturally on camera.
You gotta be a great actor. You gotta be naturalistic. You gotta be naturalistic as
After finishing the class, he created his first acting resume, which was basically a few lines of bald-faced lies. For example, he had written that he had played in George Romero's Dawn of the Dead. This movie was chosen on purpose, because at the time it was impossible to double-check. It was 1983. Quentin was already 20 years old, but his career stubbornly refused to take off. He had no idea then that a random visit to a rental store called Video Archives would cause his life to turn upside down. He came by as a film buff one day and we started talking about movies. Got into a discussion about Brian De Palma. 4 hours later, we were still talking. He came back the next day and talked about Sergio Leone. Eventually, I offered him a job, working for $4 an hour with permission to sign out as many videos as he liked, free of charge.
You got a boss, right?
Yeah.
Hey, what's his name?
Lance.
That's him.
Until I became a director. It was the best job I ever had. The store made up for any film education that Quentin might have missed. Every day it was filled with heated, 8-hour discussions about film. Each participant was constantly digging through the collection of 9,000 tapes in order to find just the right film and prove their case. This was not the place where the customer was always right. In fact, just the opposite. You could get insulted if you didn't appreciate Scorsese, or if you never heard of Francois Truffaut. If you came intending to get Hercules in New York, Tarantino would force you to get Blowout, and instead of playing Disney cartoons or the latest Schwarzenegger film, the store played pictures of Goodart and John Woo. The rundown rental store became a haven for all the cinephiles of Los Angeles, where young Quentin amazed the regulars with his phenomenal memory. I always prided myself on my cinema knowledge. Who directed what? Who started?
And Quentin would go on to tell you who the supporting cast was, who the DP was, who wrote the screenplay.
Thanks to these circumstances, a small group of like-minded companions formed around Quentin. Roger Avery, a young director working at Video Archives. Craig Hammond, whom Quentin befriended while attending James Best acting classes. And Rand Vossler, who was a beginning screenwriter and director and often visited the rental store. In those days, Craig Hammond and Tarantino were like brothers, spending all their free time together. They studied every Italian and Chinese film they could get their hands on. Hammond suggested they combine their powers and write a screenplay together, which led to My Best Friend's Birthday.
Mean, nasty, rude. I mean, he couldn't give a about anything except rocking and rolling, live fast, die young, and have a good-looking corpse.
I got something for you. Jesus Christ. Do I get anything in my nose? Not right here. Okay, cool. Okay, ready? Yeah. It's K-Billy, and we're back on the air.
The friends invested all their money in the creation of this picture. Still, the budget was so small that Tarantino made up for any lacking actors, and they filmed at his mom's house and a friend's bar. The shooting team was made up of 3 people. Quentin, the director, the administrator Roger Avery, and the cameraman Rand Vossler. The friends threw all their energy into the production, hoping this movie would help them get a little attention and further their careers. But the film was never finished. The laboratory where the film was being stored had a fire that destroyed the majority of the footage. However, it was obvious from the few fragments that were saved that Tarantino's signature style had already begun to develop.
So you don't know Eddie. He is really strong and really mean. I'm really jealous.
Freeze, Fudgepacker!
And I'm very pissed, all right?
The main source of this style was his own personality. Q always wore black, ate hamburgers, read comics, and drove an old Honda Civic. His phenomenal memory helped him find inspiration for dialogues just by overhearing conversations.
Quentin has a mind for a dialogue. He can repeat a conversation you've had 10 or 15 years ago verbatim.
One of the best places for gathering information was prison, where Quentin ended up 3 times. Each time, it was because of unpaid parking tickets. He was so distracted that he was fined $3,000 in parking tickets alone.
He's in county unexpectedly. What for? His traffic ticket's gone warrant. He's stopping for something, found warrants on him in the county.
In 1984, Hammond introduced Tarantino to beginning producer Catherine James. She helped the young talent, who only had a short and falsified resume under his belt, to get at least some kind of work in cinema. 10 years later, James helped produce Pulp Fiction. But back then, she was only able to help him get a cameo role in Golden Girls, where he played an Elvis impersonator. This episode was later included in a clip of the show's best moments and was often played on TV, thanks to which Quentin received royalties every time it was aired. At the same time, Roger Avery gave Quentin his script to read. Open Road was about a couple in love who ended up on the wrong side of the law. Q liked it. and he spent a lot of time convincing Avery to finish it. Roger was always busy and clearly burned out, so he asked Quentin to do it himself. He agreed and took the task very seriously. He got so into it that he quit his job at Video Archives and moved back in with his mother. However, in order to pay his parking fines, he got a job as a traveling salesman at Imperial Entertainment. His job was to sell cassettes to stores, like the one he worked for before. In a few months, there was almost nothing left of the original Open Road, and Avery's draft was used to create 2 screenplays, True Romance and Natural Born Killers. He finished True Romance first and decided to make the film himself, since his acting career didn't seem to be going anywhere. And the only way to get a part in a movie was to make it himself.
You know, it's not right. It's not right, and it's not fair.
Natural Born Killers was written with one goal in mind: sell the script and use the money to shoot True Romance. Unfortunately, nobody wanted anything to do with either of the scripts. Quentin didn't give up and decided to rework an old idea about the robbery of a jewelry store. Having completely devoted himself to his new work, Quentin first gave the rights to Natural Born Killers to Rand Vossler, who had helped him make My Best Friend's Birthday, and later, thanks to Catherine James, sold True Romance to the American Screen Actors Guild for the minimum amount allowed, $30,000. As 1989 unfolded, he had money and was working on a new screenplay called Reservoir Dogs. In order to avoid the same fate as his last projects, he decided not to spend the money and set aside the money for shooting. Thanks to his first official sale, you could say that Tarantino became a professional screenwriter in the eyes of Hollywood, which led to his first gig. Special effects expert Robert Kurtzman hired him to rewrite his script about vampires. He offered him $1,500 and promised to help with special effects on any of Quentin's future projects. Tarantino agreed and rewrote the whole thing. That is how From Dusk Till Dawn came into being. But Kurtzman was unable to shoot it. At one point, Robert Englund, who played Freddy Krueger, showed interest, but later changed his mind. This became Quentin's third project, which was resigned to gather dust on the shelf. When he received his next job, Quentin quit his salesman's job. For his work editing the dialogues in Past Midnight, starring Rutger Hauer as the lead, he was paid $8,000, though we wouldn't call it editing exactly.
They hired me to do a dialogue polish, all right? And it became like a page 1 rewrite. And then by the time they made the movie, it became half my rewrite and half of the original script.
Maybe you're giving him too much credit. Maybe Jordan just isn't a natural born killer.
Thanks to After Midnight, Quentin's name appeared in the credits for the first time. About that time, Q befriended Scott Spiegel, co-author of the movie Evil Dead 2. They met totally randomly when they struck up a conversation in line at a movie theater. Spiegel was impressed by Quentin's erudition and invited him to party at his house. When Scott heard the name Tarantino, he remembered another person with that same last name, whose script True Romance he had recently read. When Quentin told him it was his work, Spiegel was amazed and promised him that no matter what, he would help him make a movie. The next day, he convinced Lawrence Bender, the producer of his latest film, to work with Tarantino. That meeting became a turning point for both their careers. Tarantino worked with Lawrence as a producer for the next 19 years.
There's another asshole, my producer, right next to him, man. Tapping his watch.
Bender immediately advised Quentin to focus on making Reservoir Dogs. Tarantino finished the script in just 3 weeks and wanted to start shooting right away, using the money from True Romance and his friends as actors. But Bender asked Quentin for 1 year to seek financing worthy of a professional movie.
What happened was, I told Lawrence, all right, look, I'm going to be writing this film. I'm going to start with it next month, and I'm going to be finished with it in a few days. All right, so I write it and finish it, and I show it to him, and he goes, this is pretty good. Why don't we try to get this going as a real movie? All right, no, I've heard that all before. Forget it. I don't trust that. I'd spent 6 years trying to get deals on films. No one was going to give me a job to make a new movie. All right, no one was going to take a chance and go, here's $1 million. And so I took my destiny out of their hands. I had written 2 other scripts before that I thought I was going to make. But this one, as I'm writing it, I knew I was going to shoot a film on it. this was the one. This was achievable.
In the end, their contract was written down on a bar napkin and stated that Quentin give Bender 2 months to look for money. But within the week, events began to unfold with incredible speed. Lawrence was a longtime student of Peter Floyd's acting school, to whom he showed the Reservoir Dogs script. Floyd jokingly asked for all the actors on the planet who Bender would choose for the main role. He answered that the role would be perfect for Harvey Keitel. But here the jokes ended, because it turned out Floyd's wife was a friend of Keitel and could send him the script anytime. In just a few days, Bender got a message on his voicemail saying that Harvey not only loved the script, he said that he must play the main role, but also promised to do everything to make sure that the project received the budget and support from the studio. With Keitel, Reservoir Dogs underwent a Cinderella transformation. After a month of talks, the budget of the picture went from Quentin's saved $30,000 to $1.5 million from the company Live Entertainment.
Looks nice.
Hey, do you like our work? Let us know with your like and comment. Push that subscribe button and share with your friends. If you want to support the project financially, become our sponsor on Patreon or YouTube sponsorship. Thank you.